time for us to continue with our series of curiously spooky events. As a matter of fact, we're talking about haunted roads. You remember previously I mentioned the haunted road leading to Bradley Woods. Well, not far out of Grimsby there's a well-known road called Humberston Avenue. And down there, curious things have been going on for some time, you know. But a couple of people in the early part of the winter were walking along there, having an early morning walk, pleasant morning mist. Apart from that, the atmosphere was still, there was no wind. They suddenly heard the pounding of hooves coming up the avenue behind them. The sound came closer and closer. They looked round nervously, but nothing was to be seen in the mist. When the sound of the hooves was almost upon them, they thought, well, we may not be able to see whoever's coming, but we're going to get out of the way here. They flung themselves aside. Just as the sound reached them, the hooves went pounding past them and off down the avenue, and the sounds disappeared into the mist, which lay all about them. Well, they sort of got themselves up, but they'd actually tumbled over into the long grass that's the side of the countrified part of Humberston Avenue. They were very offended. No sign of anybody there. Who was it? There wasn't anybody. The invisible horseman of Humberston Avenue. As a matter of fact, one or two people suggested it could have been my own father who used to have horses down there, but even he, I don't think, would have been up at that time, and certainly wouldn't have galloped down the footpath where people were walking. So that remains a mystery. There are many mysteries, mysterious hitchhikers on roads. In the annals of ufology and unidentified flying objects, people have been abducted from remote roads. And you know, as to haunted roadways, some parts of the country seem more haunted than others, though we in North East Links here, we have our share. And I have a story from the famous singer Honey Jackson, who came across a most curious haunting. And she and I were on the road and were photographed by a number of papers when she'd been astounded by a curious meeting that she'd had late one night. She'd been coming home from a show.
It had been a very busy night and a very tiring night, and a good night as well. And I got my friend with me to kind of help me carry the gear, and we were driving home from Nottingham via the M1, down the M180, onto the M18 and onto the M180. And we got to as far as Barnaby Top, where you turn off for Hull. And by this time I was getting a little bit tired because we'd been laughing and talking on the way home, and the adrenaline was slowly sleeping away. I knew I'd got about another 15 miles to go.
Suddenly, in the dim light, the headlights picked up the figure of a man standing right in the middle of the road and right in front of her car.
And about 100 yards ahead was a figure stood on the dual carriageway itself towards the outside lane near the centre reservation where the steel girders are. He was slightly stood more in, and I was actually going straight for him. Our instinct, which has bonded us ever since, my friend Shirley and myself, because we both instinctively gasped and screamed in, I can't describe the sound because the fear was unbelievable. There was this apparition stood there. He must have been at least 7 foot tall. He was so tall, that was what took in our minds. He'd got a long, kind of very old-fashioned mac on, off-white, mucky coloured, and with big buttons. You couldn't see his feet, it was down to the floor. And we took all this in a matter of seconds, and his head had got on his head like a hat, like an old fisherman's windsheeter hat, like the lifeguards wear, you know, when they go and save you and all this, but smaller. Thinking back now, it could have even been like a cowl. But we took all this in, and we looked at his face. There was nothing. It was just blackness, total blackness, stillness, blackness. But the worst part about it all was the arm that was coming out of it, obviously out of the raincoat, was feathered across the two dual carriageways, and we were heading towards this. My friend and I, we never said a word. We screamed, and we took all this in this matter of time. And of course we must have been travelling about 50 miles an hour. And we both bobbed down instinctively at the same time. because this arm was feathered right across the top of the car as we were going towards it. And our instinct was that he was trying to stop us. There was some form of evil there or something that was trying to stop us. And we both bobbed down. But of course, I was heading straight for him. So I tried to swerve the car at the same time, whatever it was, to try and miss it. But it was obviously too late because all this happened in seconds. And we went straight through him. The freezing cold, all I can explain is I glanced to the right as I went through him, and it was massive mist where we'd gone through, and we were both still kind of driving. I was like this driving, and my hair on the back of my head and on my arms, and they still go up now when we talk about it. Everything kind of was frozen, and all my friend could say to me was, honey, put your foot down, go, 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 go. And one thing I had to do was I had to look in the mirror, because I had to assure myself that I hadn't dreamt this. And I looked in the mirror and there was just nothing, just blackness of where we'd been, totally.
Now, this story inevitably got into the papers, and I received a phone call from a gentleman who said he thought he knew who the ghost well might be, of all extraordinary things. And apparently, some years ago, his father had been killed on that very bit of road in a freak accident. And I have the gentleman's name and address. And he said he feels that his ghost appears there as a sort of a warning. Not an angel of doom, I suppose, but a very good warning to tell people, look, be careful. It's a signal. This is where I was killed. Could that be the case? Stranger things have happened. And whilst we're talking about roads, the most extraordinary thing happened to a friend of mine, who is the very well-known actor Johnny Lees. And this was early on.
The occurrence that happened to me was about 6 or 7 years ago, and I was driving down the M62 coming home from a gig when I was a comedian. I'd been working out the Leeds or Sheffield, and it was absolutely thick with fog and a real pea soup. You couldn't see the front of the bonnet. And I was driving in the middle lane of the three with a stream of cars behind me, and nobody was trying to overtake because obviously the weather was too bad. And all of a sudden, I didn't smoke at the time, and the car filled with cigarette smoke. And my dad was a heavy smoker, and he died in 1980. And all of a sudden his voice said, just pull out. And I pulled out in the fast lane, and there was the biggest pile up ever in front. And all the cars pulled up behind me to see if we could render assistance. And the police were there. They got the blue flashing lights we couldn't see because the fog was so thick. And the guy in the car behind said, well, I'm glad you saw it because I didn't. And I just said, well, yeah, I saw it at the last moment. I mean, you're not going to say, yeah, my dad told me, like, to be in the funny farm. So the police asked us to move on in case any cars were coming behind us, and we did, though. And after we passed the crash, I lost all coordination. I didn't know whether I'd passed the A19 or I was coming up the A19 turn off. And I'd driven probably about a mile, very, very slowly, and all of a sudden, again, the cigarette smoke came in the car, and my dad said, turn off now. And I looked up, and it was the sign for the M180, and I got home safely.
Well, that's all for now. Thanks for being with us. And by the way, I hope you'll join us next time, because we have some intriguing details to tell you about a case which I'm undertaking the research of at this present time. See you soon.